Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We are very excited and grateful that you've joined us for today's episode of the show. And today on the podcast, we are stoked to be joined by Jason Hardrath. Jason has an absolutely amazing and pretty epic travel story. He joined us from a van where he has been living and working for the last 5 years. He actually keeps a professional job as a PE teacher, which is pretty cool, and then spends his time on the weekend and his holidays traveling around the US doing fastest known time records.
Yes. So if you don't know what fastest known times are, or you do, you'll find out in this interview. And we also hear about what it's like to have a career while living in a van, what people thought when he made that transition 5 years ago and how he kind of manages it. We talk about the accident that he overcame that really limited his physical options, and that doctors had told him he would never be able to do a lot of his athletic pursuits. And he battled back to go on this challenge of working towards creating and completing 100 fastest known times. And then we talk about what that journey has been like. He's closing in on his final one at this point. So it's a really fascinating interview. It's really motivating. And we also talk about kind of how to find that thing, that spark for you in your own journey. What's that thing that makes you come alive, and how to really go for it. So I think a lot of people will get a lot of good value out of listening to this episode with Jason.
Absolutely. And before we dive into the interview, we just wanted to let you know about the World Wanderers Insider. The World Wanderers Insider is our special bonus feed for Patreon supporters and our Patreon community members. And it is all about digital nomad life. So we talk about different ways that you can work and travel, different jobs that people do while working on traveling, some of our top tips, what we've learned along the way, and so much more. So if you are stepping into the work and travel life, then head on over to patreon.com/The World Wanderers to learn more and maybe access some of the episodes.
So without further ado, here is Jason. All right. Welcome to the show, Jason. We're very excited to be chatting with you today.
I'm super excited to be here. I'm glad we finally made this work.
So the first thing, and people listening won't be able to see this, but from the video we saw, you're in a car, you're in what looks like an interesting location behind you. Where in the world are you right now?
I'm sitting right outside of Red Rocks, outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. Out here to do some running and scrambling, and maybe even break a couple FKTs.
That's amazing. And can you tell us, since the audience can't see you, like the actual physical location that you're in? So not geographical, but where you're actually joining us from?
Yeah, so it's been quite a fiasco this trip. I'm a school teacher off for my spring break. Normally I'd roll in my van that's also my home, but it decided to either blow a head gasket or an oil cooler and mix the oil and oil and coolant together. And so it's broken down in Bishop, California. About 4 hours away, sitting at a diesel shop, and I'm here in a rental van to try to make something out of the rest of this trip.
Yeah, nothing. I mean, normally getting in car troubles sucks, but I think especially when you're calling it your home, it also adds another dimension of awfulness to getting into those car troubles. So we're sorry to hear about that, but that's, I think, a great place to kind of kick off the conversation. And something when we were trading emails before talking, that was a lot of what you're doing in terms of the adventure, the fastest known times. That's really interesting. But something that also stands out is living in a van, but doing it in a way that most people don't do it. Often you hear someone living in a van and they're, nomads, they're traveling, but you're actually working as a school teacher. So can you fill us in on how all that came to be, the living in a van, working as a teacher?
Well, I became a teacher before I started the van life. And teaching for me, I'm definitely one of those teachers that it's a passion. I teach health and PE. I like to say that I live what I teach and I teach what I love. Because, people, of course, recommended as I went into that profession, like, oh, you should get more endorsements than just health and PE. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble getting a job. And I'd heard stories about teachers who went in to teach their passion, but got a second endorsement. And then slowly but surely, they ended up teaching only that second endorsement and didn't enjoy it. I'm like, oh, I don't even want that. I'd rather not have a job than just be like teaching kids something that I don't enjoy teaching them. Because I feel, I don't know, we've all had those teachers that either loved or hated their job, and you could tell. And I wanted to be one of those teachers that was teaching what they loved so that the kids could see that broadcast. And then when I graduated university, I had biked across the United States, which was this beautiful experience of, super minimal living. And I kind of reflected on that after I'd gotten into my teaching career. I'm like, you know what? I've also done a couple of summers where I bought a van for the summer and then sold it at the end of the summer, and just went like national park hopping. I'm like, I should just run the experiment of living out of a van full time while having a professional job. And if it lasts for a year, awesome. If it lasts longer, awesome. But just see what it's like to live an entire lifestyle with a profession and see how little does a person need to be happy, really. And that kind of lands me where I am now, where as of next month, it'll have been 5 years since I've paid rent or anything like that to have a place to sleep. 5 years of van life.
Yeah. Wow. That's very impressive. And I think it brings up so many interesting questions. But I think for me, something I'm curious about is just the logistical part of that. Like, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Do you have a place you normally park and stay at? Or how do you go about, where do you sleep every night? Where do you park the van? What's it kind of like driving to work in your home?
Absolutely. So it's been an evolution over time, and there was definitely drew some judgmental looks, if you will. Because the idea of van life's very fringe to anyone that's in a teaching profession, as you can imagine. That tends to be a very traditional thinking job environment. And I mean, it's also a little weird for like the van life community. Like, wait a minute, okay, you're like living in a van, but you have this professional career with like a pension at the end and da 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 da. And so when I started off, I like took a really purist approach to it. Like I wanted to force myself to figure out where to park. Like, where are the safe places in town where you kind of walk this line of not being in the territory where you're going to get bothered by miscreants or, people wanting to do crime or, things like that, but also where you're not going to get bothered by the police and get your sleep disrupted. So like, I purposely didn't accept offers from friends that are like, oh, you can just park at my house. So when I first started, I definitely feel like the first year and a half, I was just sort of like learning the places where I could park, the lots that nobody cared and nobody visited. And, rolling in at a time in the evening where it didn't draw attention, and then rolling out in the morning. And I was driving my van back and forth between work and where I would stay. And then over time, as I started to build relationships, and people some people who were enthusiastic about it became aware of the lifestyle I was living. And I mean, I guess I have a pretty broad skill set. I'm a mountain guide as well as being a teacher. I'm an ultra running coach. So I started to strike up these relationships here and there, or these trades, if you will. For example, I'm now coaching an owner at a co-working space for mountain running. And so I kind of get a trade there where it's like, they don't mind if I park in their lot. And I have a membership, a heavily discounted membership at the co-working space. So I have like a space that has like a kitchenette and a sort of a space to do my work. And so that's kind of evolved out of this sort of bartering, if you will. And so now I have that space, and I actually picked up a little tiny Geo Metro for the time being that I use to commute back and forth between there and work. So it's kind of interesting to have two vehicles, but no home in the traditional sense. Yeah. So I guess that's the 3 or 30,000 foot flyover of how that works. I guess the other thing I do is you kind of, to loosely use the term, outsourcing resources, where it's like, okay, where else do resources that normally you put in your home exist? And for example, I have a shower in my office at work because I'm the PE teacher. So I can couple my showering with going to work. I have a friend who lives alone that, loves the trade of bring me a beer for the use of a washer and dryer, and we'll hang out and have a conversation while it's going. So it's like you just put those resources you normally just pile into a house space and go, okay, well, they're abundantly available in other locations, and just sort of building a life and a lifestyle around where those resources are and the relationships that go along with them.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. And I love that you're thinking outside the box in terms of how to get all of your needs met. And I think that that's such a cool idea to find, a friend that you can do kind of like a swap with and have a hangout with when you need to do laundry, and having the shower at work is great. And so in your van, do you have then like a little kitchenette and a place to sleep, I would assume?
I humorously say my van is basically a glorified gear wagon. It's got a ton of climbing gear in it, running gear, mountain gear, guiding gear. And yeah, it's got like a super minimal like cook setup for when I'm on the road. I've found, over time, I'm a very passions driven person and not a very comforts driven person. And so over time, I found that I need very little to find happiness and balance in that regard, as long as I'm able to get out and go on these, these adventures that inspire me. So I guess that would be, I would say that it's a pretty basic, it's a bed. And, you can imagine like gear on shelves and gear on hooks lining the walls. And, then like a small, like propane cook stove I can pull out, slide or slide in. Yeah. And other than that, it's just, it's a retired ambulance, which definitely gives it some character. I took a retired E350 ambulance. So not the big box ones, but the van ones with the high top. The lights and the sirens still function on it, which is fun when you're out in the middle of nowhere.
That's amazing.
Definitely, I'm definitely irresponsible with that when I get out into a place like the Alvord Desert in Oregon where there's no one.
I mean, you have to. I feel like I'd be so tempted in bad traffic to just turn that on. So I feel like obviously you probably can't legally do that. So as soon as there's nobody around, it's like you gotta turn that on, I think.
Yep, absolutely. There is a definite degree of fun that comes with it. So that would be the quick summary of what the van is like.
Yeah, and something I'm curious about. So I'm guessing when you went into it, you weren't necessarily committing to, hey, I'm going to do this for 5 years. I'm going to do this for the rest of your life. You're thinking maybe try this out, see if it works. And it turns out that it's worked quite well. But what kind of drove you to think like, hey, I need to be, living in a van. I need to have that type of freedom and flexibility. And what was it kind of about like living in a traditional setup that just wasn't working for you?
Well, when you choose the teacher life, you are choosing, a life of service. And in my case, a life of like passion, but you're not choosing a high income. The benefit outside of like being able to do something that you're excited and passionate about, something that you can believe in, because, the youth is our future, is you have this time off, but you don't have the money to necessarily do very much with that time off. And so it was sort of I guess I can use the term that people toss around, lifestyle design element, where I'm like, okay, if I can find a way to be happy in a van with downsizing all of the things I've ever owned into what will fit in a van, and I can do that while being happy and balanced and maintaining good mental health, then that's going to basically be, I humorously once recorded a short video a long time ago when someone asked like, oh, do you have a sponsor for some of these adventures I go on? And I just recorded a video of me pointing at my van. It's like, my van's my sponsor, right? I don't have to like pay rent. And because of that, I can afford when a break rolls around to go on some wild harebrained adventure to a corner of the USA and try to climb something or run something that, not many people who do what I do get to try.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in most American cities, like rent is so expensive, right? Like we can spend, $20,000, $30,000 a year on just our rent. And when you think about, the average income, maybe between like, let's say $50,000 and $70,000 a year, that's a good chunk of your money just going towards where you actually live. And I think it's really cool that you've decided to, you kind of like make your home something that you can also adventure with, because just like you said, when you have these breaks from teaching, then you're not really held back in terms of where to go. You don't have to worry about like, is it really expensive to book a hotel during spring break, because your home is your transportation as well. And you can sleep there pretty much anywhere. So I think it's like a pretty cool lifestyle design setup. I'm wondering, I mean, you sound like you're pretty minimalist and that's the way you like to live, but are there ever times where you feel like, man, this is hard, I wish I had more space or more stuff?
Not quite that way. I think now that I've entered my 30s, I'm 32 now. I think occasionally I get a hankering for a space that I can just like set up and have it be a certain way and like put my ideas on the wall and they just stay there for however long I want them to be. I guess an office space or whatever that's actually just my own. Occasionally I get a hankering for a space like that I can just have everything just as I want it to be, with like room for, whiteboards full of ideas or whatever. But I've never thought about that. I don't think I've ever had that thought regarding things. As long as I've got a way to make really good coffee, that's one thing that I've noticed, that it's like, if I neglect my coffee making abilities, don't have a good setup for that, or forget something, or break something and I'm out on the road, it's like the happiness in life goes down a notch. I'm like, oh man. So yeah, I guess that's how I'd answer that is sometimes I have a hankering for just like a large open space that I can put whatever I want on the walls and hang things however I want. And it just stays that way.
Yeah, for sure. I love how we all have like our creature comforts, like the coffee that you're talking about. I know Ryan and I both have that, similar stuff as well, where it's like, okay, if we have this thing, then we're good to go. But I don't know, maybe there's something like I don't know if it's like a very deep, like primal sort of human instinct as you hit your like late 20s, early 30s, because I'm the exact same age as you, Jason, and Ryan's just a couple months behind us. And we felt the same way. Like we love the nomadic lifestyle that we live, but there's also sometimes this craving for, like you're saying, a space where it's like, this is my office space and this is our bookshelf and whatnot with that. It's kind of interesting just to hear you say that and be in sort of the same life stage.
Yeah. I kind of thought that too. I'm like, this must be what it's like to progress through the 30s. And I wonder how that's going to shape my decisions in the future, as like, if these feelings get stronger over time, the instincts or whatever's driving them. It's interesting because it could radically alter. Like I've been very happy for the last 5 years with living in, and I've not ever owned nice vans. I should bother to say that right now. Like, one of them was two of them have been Astro vans on the edge of breaking down. I would often laugh to myself when I would pull up to dirt baggy areas where people are dirt bagging out of vans. And I would look around and look at the most beat up vehicles there with stickers on them and stuff. And I'd look at my vehicle and be like, yep, mine's the worst. Like I'm not living like a super plush, nice van life. And so, yeah, it'll just be interesting over time, like how happy I've been with how little I've had in regards to material possessions or things that give you, rank order in a hierarchy or a social status or whatnot. Like I've had things that would be ranked at the bottom, like I just made a joke about. It'll be interesting to see if that changes, like if that gets altered as, the 30s roll on toward the 40s. Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. And so you mentioned kind of having that passion for teaching and just wanting to create a life where you're able to follow through on your passions, and how living in a way that allows you to be more mobile, more free, lets you get out and go on these adventures where you're able to do mountaineering, running, and do fastest known times. And so I think it'd be good to kind of transition into there. And so for us, obviously, hearing fastest known time, that's very literal. You can kind of get what it means. But can you kind of like tell us a bit more about that goal and the world of like achieving fastest known times and kind of everything that's around that?
Absolutely. So I guess starting from the basics. So a fastest known time is just like it sounds. It's a fastest known time in a given place. It can be between 2 points on a trail, the full length of a trail. So like there's an FKT for the Pacific Crest Trail, to name a big one everybody knows. There's an FKT for base camp to summit of Everest. There's FKTs on a lot of local peaks and local trails. The thing that distinguishes a fastest known time from, say, an active user of sports apps who's listening to this might know about Strava and Strava segments. And like you can have a Strava segment that runs from the local coffee shop to the local alignment shop, right? Like they can exist anywhere, and anybody who crosses those points gets their name added to that leaderboard, who's using the app. The difference between that and a fastest known time is a fastest known time needs to be something that's unique, that it portrays that region or area or captures something that people love to do. Peter Backwin, one of the founders, what he said to me when I first got into chasing these things is FKTs are like art. You know it when you see it, you know it when you don't, pulling that old quote that's been around for a while and applying it to FKTs. And I think when a route captures an area, or a set of routes really capture an area, like, this is what athletes here, this is what active people here go and test themselves on, then it's like, okay, that deserves to be on that board of recognized FKTs and have the time tracked on an international level where people who are traveling could come and attempt that record in that place, in that style. And another unique thing about them is you can do it. Anybody who has a GPS that they can track their run with or their climb with, and a cell phone, which you can use the cell phone for both. You can do the tracking and take photos. And photos on cell phones are geotagged. So they have your exact location and your exact time that the photo was taken. So you combine those two things and it becomes a form of evidence to back your story that you say, I went and climbed this peak this fast. It's like, okay, well, where's your GPS data and where are your photos? And so you submit those when you submit to claim an FKT. And yeah, it's super cool because you're able to have these races, if you will, against anyone who's attempted a given peak. Like I'm sitting here staring at Rainbow Peak right now in the Red Rocks, and I had the FKT on it, and a local Vegas guy came out and beat me back because he knew a route much more intimately than I knew it. That was a faster route than the route I climbed. So I'm here, and yesterday I went out and I rehearsed the whole route that he climbed, picking my way through it slowly, making sure I knew all the turns and which goalies to go up and down. And the hope is that, after I let my body rest up a little bit today, I'll go out tomorrow and I'll be able to, edge him out by just a little bit and go that little bit faster. But you could never host a formal race because the terrain out here, for example, is, you're alternating between like rock climbing and scrambling, and no race director is going to be able to afford the insurance to have people just scramble up the side of a mountain where they could get lost or fall down a gully or anything like that. So that's kind of a unique element. You're able to go test yourself on things with some level of validation against other athletes. And I find that a huge draw, because with a race, you're paying a race director to basically take care of all the logistics for you, right? Where's food and water? Where's the start and finish? Where does the route go, and flagging it so that people can't get lost. When you do an FKT, you still have to show up with the fitness that you do, which is the variable you still have at a race. You're basically paying the race director to have it so you can show up and just test your fitness. With an FKT, you're still testing your fitness, but you're taking all of those logistics, that mental planning, that creativity, that route finding, how much water do I need? When do I need it? How much food do I need? You're putting all that back on your shoulders and saying, okay, I'm going to carry all of this and I'm going to go test my fitness. And I've fallen in love with that cerebral part and that creative part of both finding new routes that are the best routes of an area and repeating great routes and figuring out how to climb them faster or run them faster.
Yeah, it is really, really cool. And I think It's funny because for us, like we're relatively active people. We live in the Rockies in Canada in the summer. We like to go out and hiking, but kind of not really familiar with this world. But kind of digging into your background and reading about it does sound really fascinating. And you're up in, maybe you've added one already on this trip, but you're up to 96 out of your 100 goal, right?
Yep. I'm at 96. I have not snuck in the 97th yet, but like I said, I'm hoping it's gonna happen here real soon.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So I guess I should say, I'm a PE teacher and I'm a decent athlete. I've done some okay things, like on a pedestrian level, people would be like, "Whoa, you're fast." But on like an elite level, people would be like, "No, he's not fast." So I'm definitely not elite in any way. And some people who like to be armchair critics have been like, "Oh, he doesn't attempt any FKTs that real athletes have done." It's like, well, yeah, I've never claimed to be Jim Walmsley. He's a really fast ultra runner who's broken a lot of records recently in the ultra running world. It's like, I've never claimed to be a Jim Walmsley. I'm just a typical guy who loves this stuff, who's out here creating new routes that hopefully someday the Jim Walmsleys of the world will want to test themselves on. And because of that, like, I knew two things about myself. I love to be out in it. I love to be out in the fray of testing myself and being in beautiful spaces, rather than say like following a perfect training plan and racing once in a year to have the perfect race. I'd rather just go every weekend. And right, the van life incentivizes that. Because if you're a person sitting in a van on the weekend doing nothing, that's kind of lame. But if you're the person who every weekend takes the van out to an epic place to do an epic adventure, it's like, yeah, that's what's meant to be. And so it incentivizes like going and doing more often. And that was another part of the decision why I chose that. It's like, okay, I'll be incentivized instead of sitting, when you have a home space, it's like the most comfortable, easy thing to do is just to sit at home. And you almost have to try hard to go somewhere else. When you have a van, it's like, you kind of feel like a loser if you don't go do anything interesting, because it's like, why do I have this van? So it like flips that incentive. So I knew this about myself. I love to go and adventure often rather than trying to have one perfect race. And I have a body that, though I'm not very athletic in like a single output sense, like I'm not the fastest guy. I don't climb the fastest. I don't climb the hardest. I seem to be able to go back to back to back to back with these huge efforts and just seem to not ever, knock on wood, end up injured. So it was like knowing that about my body and knowing that about my mind, it was like, okay, it makes sense to set a goal where I try to do as many of these adventures as I can. And so the, arbitrary number of 100, I don't know what it is about us humans. We love big round numbers, and 100 is one of those. And it's like, okay, I'm going to try to do 100 different FKTs. And it was exciting to me because it's like, okay, each one of those by itself is going to be like a storytelling experience. And so if I complete this goal, I'm going to have 100 different amazing memories, 100 different amazing stories to tell. And I guess, that ties back with a fear we all have. Like, at least I know I felt it really distinctly as I graduated university, the super tangible fear of, oh man, like I'm going to go start real life. What if I wake up 30 years from now and wonder what the hell I did with my life? What if I just slip into autopilot and 30 years go by and I'm retirement age and I have no clue what happened with my life? And so this is one of those ways to be like, okay, I'm definitely doing something that makes me feel alive. And I'm not just letting the years tick by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we can definitely relate to that feeling as well, especially heading into our first like career jobs after university. And I remember just thinking like, do people really just do this till they're 65 and then I guess like live off the money you've made? I was like, I don't really want to do that. So I can definitely hear you there. And this fastest known time world is like completely new to Ryan and I would imagine for some people listening too. I would love to just go back a little bit and hear, like, how did you discover about this world?
That's a great question. I actually was already sort of living the FKT lifestyle before I ever knew what fastest known times were. because basically what happened is I was very into Ironman triathlon in 2012 through the start of 2015. Then May of 2015, I went out a car window in a rollover accident and smashed up the whole right side of my body, broke 9 ribs, collapsed a lung, broke my shoulder in 2 places, shredded the LCL and ACL in my right knee. So, all down the right side of my body, just carnage would be a good word. And that put like a hard period. One of the first things a doctor said to me is like, I brought up how passionate I was about this stuff, triathlon and running. And he just coldly was like, oh, you're probably going to have to let that part of your life go, and then walks to the room. So it was a tough phase of life to go through, but I could go 1,000 different ways with the stories from this and the learning experiences. But basically what I knew from having to study some biomechanics to become a physical educator is that when you're walking up and down steep hills, you don't have to lock your knee out. You don't have to have the same range of motion in your knee to be an efficient runner. And so it's like, okay, I guess I just hike hills now. And I started hiking local hills. Hills led to mountains. Mountains led to bigger mountains. Then I ran into mountains that had technical, climbing elements like I've talked about. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to take up rock climbing now to never run into a situation where I don't know how and don't feel confident to get myself to the top and back down of a technical peak. And so I started learning those skills. And so over the course of the 2 years that it took for my knee to get back to a place where I could at least somewhat run, I still can't run like I did prior to the accident. But when the running started to come back, I then had this deep skill set of rock climbing, glacier travel, mountaineering. And it became a natural thought to go, well, I can run again. Let's start. And I ran into a buddy that kind of had the same mindset at that time. And we were just like, let's start running between different peaks that normally people take a whole day to climb, and like climb 3 of them in a day. And so we were already out there like pushing ourselves like that. And we did a route called the Crater Lake Rim High Route that we created. And that was still before I knew what FKTs were. And that's just circumnavigating Crater Lake, but you have to tag all of the 7 high points over 8,000 feet as you do it, instead of just running on the road or biking on the road like most people would. And so we did that. And then shortly after, I discovered this whole fastest known time world. And I was like, oh my gosh, that route should be on here. I can't believe something like that's not on here. And so I submitted that route and then just started chasing other things that I found in the area and creating more cool routes. Cause I'm like, okay, I'm capable of creating cool routes that other people think are awesome. Like I should contribute in this way. So yeah, I guess that's a little bit more on that story of how I came to do it. I was already sort of doing it. And so it made a really natural fit to be like, well, I guess I'll just do more of this and do it with some level of validation, and maybe I can leave something behind that inspires someone.
Yeah, I think that's such a fascinating part of your story, bouncing back and coming back from something as serious as that car accident. What's it like now after, you're almost reaching this goal, to kind of look back on how you felt like at the time when the doctor was saying like, you might have to give up this part of your life?
Oh man, I mean, there's all sorts of like feelings. I mean, there's definitely that feeling of like, the ha showed you, especially when I was 25 when he said that to me. And at first there was I remember this distinct like sinking of my spirits. And then this is all happening over like moments of time, right? Like the sinking of my spirits, but then it just triggered this like, no, you just watch, you don't know me. Like I'm going to find a way to fight back to doing some version of what I love. And I didn't know at that point, of course, didn't know I'd be doing FKTs or climbing mountains. But I knew I would not settle for anything less than finding some version of what I loved to push myself on. Cause I was an ADHD little kid, and movement became a very important part of my life for both mental health, and it gave me a sense of identity, someplace where I could thrive. Cause when you're an impulsive ADHD kiddo, you tend to destroy relationships and situations with your impulsive behaviors that you struggle to control. And so it gave me a place where I could thrive instead of constantly messing stuff up. And so, yeah, just, I wasn't willing to embrace a version of myself without having physical challenge and physical activity as a part of my life. So I don't know, there's a sense of accomplishment. There's a sense of, like having defied the odds, if you will. Definitely joy, definitely hope, and like wanting to pass that on to other people, that when you face these setbacks that upend your whole world, that you can come out the other end thriving and perhaps doing something even more amazing than what you were doing before. Because people ask the question all the time, like, well, what if the car accident hadn't happened? And I mean, it's like, I was doing pretty cool stuff and I was doing pretty well in the triathlon world. Like I think in 2015, I would have qualified to go compete at the Kona Ironman World Championships. My training was just on point that year. I was stronger than I'd ever been by leaps and bounds. But like when I think about that versus what I'm doing now, I think what I'm doing now has more value to me and has grown me more as a person and as an athlete and a person. I've had to learn so many things I never would have learned and unlocked parts of the world I never would have had access to. But also I think it gives me more to teach others, because anytime you better yourself, you're able to better teach. I like to say you can only truly teach what you become. And I get to leave something behind, these routes I create, and this gauntlet of attempting. Some other people have started trying to attempt to get to 100 FKTs now too. And they're finding it's like this brutal process because you're out there pushing your body so often. And the FKTs that you have on your list of things that are possible only get faster over time. So it's like the game gets harder as you play it. So leaving that behind and having a story to tell that says, hey, when you're faced with odds that aren't in your favor, if you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to put in the time, there is a way through it. There is a way to thrive through it. And I think that's really valuable to me. Yeah, I guess having my life amount to some amount of good and not just be a waste and a tax on people around me has always been important, but has increased in importance over the last 5 years.
Yeah. I think that all of the stuff you touched on there is so awesome. And especially the idea of just like not building constraints for yourselves. Like in your situation, you could have easily taken, the doctor said this, that means like, oh, my life possibilities are limited to these things now. And I think so many people kind of hang on to things like that, whether it's a health condition or maybe a family thing or maybe a work thing, but whatever it is, it's like, oh, for X reason, I can't do Y, Z, whatever, other thing. But like, we do have the power to, really kind of what we set our minds to, we can do things. And so if it's changing your job, if it's recovering from an injury, whatever it might be, like a lot of these limits that we think we have on our lives are just decisions that we're making for ourselves.
Absolutely. It is so easy to develop self-limiting beliefs. Like even with the lifestyle I try to live and the things I try to do that are like pushing boundaries in various sports, it's like really easy for me to become aware that I've developed a self-limiting belief where I'm telling myself a story that says I can't do blank because. And most often, what ultra running has taught me over time is I can think of this one race where I went out way too fast at the start. It was a 100-kilometer race, my first ever 62-mile race, 100 kilometers. And I went out way too fast with the lead group, just out crushing. And I don't know why I did. I had no plan to do that. I think I was just still really young and naive to just how long those distances are. And by mile 11, my heart rate had maxed out. I had to lay down on the ground because I was like feeling woozy and like dizzy. And I remember just laying there and being like, oh man, this is over. Like I'm 11 miles in, I have like 50 miles to go. And there's no possible way, feeling this terrible, that I could push on for way longer than I've already gone. And then for some reason, the thought crossed my mind. It's like, you know what? I'm way ahead of the cutoff times for this race where they remove you from the course because they need to close things down. And there are people who come to these races who the only thing they show up to do is to just hope on hopes that they can move fast enough to stay just ahead of the cutoffs the whole day. no chance of running with the lead group, no chance of winning, but they show up and they do it. And for some reason in my head in that moment, as I'm feeling sick, near vomiting on the ground, I'm like, out of respect to those people, the only two ways I exit this course are if I go through the finish line under my own power, or they pull me from the course because I've moved too slow. And I went on, mostly walking, for another 49, 51 miles, whatever it was, all the way to the finish line, with my body never feeling any better, feeling woozy, feeling sick, feeling nauseous, my body just screaming at me, cramping, screaming at me to like give up, that it's over. There's no way you can finish this. You feel way too bad. And went on for another 50 miles to the finish line. And that lesson always just resonates in my mind, that it's like the time at which your mind is telling you you're done, it's over, this is beyond your limits, can be 10 hours, 11 hours different, 50 miles different than where your actual limits are. And I mean, who knows how much further I could have kept going, because it's like I hit the finish line and stopped, but I hadn't, my body hadn't shut down yet. So I always keep that in mind. I feel like that there's a lesson there about all of life hidden within that experience, that our minds are always going to tell us to throw in the towel well before we actually need to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really inspiring story to hear. And just, I feel like, I haven't been in that type of situation personally. I think the closest I've been to has been, on some really big hikes. And then I ran a half marathon, like 5-6 years ago. And I'm not a big runner. I don't really feel like I'm even built for running, but I, trained for this thing, and it was hard, like 6K in, my ankle was hurting. And I just kept saying, like, for probably, an hour and a half after that, as I was running, like, don't stop running, don't stop running. And it is really crazy what you can do physically when you can push through mentally, because your body will try to make you stop and your mind wants to go along with it. And sometimes it's like your mind is trying to make your body stop, and you have to be able to get through that. So everything you're saying is just really, really inspiring to hear.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like I'm still learning it. It's like every time it's a lesson. One silly thing I've started to do, that maybe there's some transferability to life here, but when I feel that sense of like my brain screaming at me to shut down, I'll like literally in that moment, I'll look down at my legs, and I'll either verbally out loud or just mentally form the question, are my legs still moving me forward? And it's like, the obvious answer is yes. My muscles are still firing. I'm still covering ground, whether it's walking or jogging or whatever. It's like, okay, then you're fine. Keep going. Like, everything else is just being made up in my head. If I'm still making progress toward my goal, everything is fine. All the rest of the experience, like, it can be highs and lows, and it can really, really, really suck. But if you can take that like objective look and you like see that movement, then it's like, there's no arguing with that. It's like, no, I'm still able to do this. I don't have to give up. And I feel like that's one of the reasons I love being a physical educator, is there are these hidden lessons that apply to life and, the career, relationships, all of that you can experience in a tangible way through the physical world, through physical challenge, that in order to get that same practice in real life, something terrible would have to happen in your life that you would never wish on anyone. But you can go have that experience with yourself through a physical challenge and like learn and grow from it without it being a catastrophic occurrence in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a lot more we could ask you about. We could go down a whole bunch of rabbit holes, but I guess kind of one final question to kind of start wrapping things up would be, so for you, just listening to you talk, Jason, it really seems like you're someone who's found your things, right? Like you've found things you're passionate about and you've really leaned into them, whether that's making the decision to like move out of a house and into a van. So it allows you to travel more, doing all of these different fastest known times. You've really been able to find the stuff that makes you feel alive and like not be worried about what society thinks about going for that stuff. For someone who's maybe like in an earlier stage where they're trying to find out what those things are for them, and they're dealing with like not being sure of like breaking off a more traditional route to go after the things they care about, what would be your advice to someone who's in a situation like that?
I think you need to take stock of what it is you think you're more interested in. And I think it's really important to not be too addicted to having a bullseye to aim at. I think that's one way we can end up limiting ourselves, because we're like, oh, I don't know exactly what I want. When I started, climbing local hills after my car accident, I had no clue that I would fall in love with mountaineering and rock climbing, that I would then turn that into chasing fastest known times and travel all over, the Pacific Northwest and the country, chasing these efforts. I think what you have to choose to do is, I like to think of it like a blurry target, right? So you've got this target way out there, and you just need to do something that moves you in that general direction of, I know I want more of this in my life, whatever that this is for you. And you just make decisions that move you toward that. And your action plan that actually makes sure you're moving toward it would be creating what some psychologists call bright lines. They're the rules that you follow for yourself that keep you moving in a certain direction. So whether that's, I'm a person that works out every day, or I don't drink alcohol anymore. You set these bright lines, whatever it might be, that's going to help you move toward your goals, that are going to move you toward that target. And as you run these experiments, right? I like to think of them like experiments, adventures, experiments. It's the spirit of curiosity, the spirit of exploration. As you run these experiments that move you a little bit toward it, seeing how they make you feel, seeing the amount of happiness, you're going to get greater clarity on that next layer of the target, until eventually you've run enough experiments that you're running really quality experiments for your own passion and excitement and happiness. And occasionally you'll run a bad one. Like, there are things I do that I'm like, that was really unenjoyable. I didn't like that. I'm never coming back to this place. And that's okay. Those happen. But you kind of want to be going through this sort of almost curious, scientific, explorative process of like trying new things, right? I tried out living in the van. I tried out hiking local hills and then climbing the next bigger mountain. It could have been the case that when I climbed the next big mountain that was covered in snow and ice, I absolutely hated being cold. And because I do actually dislike being cold, I just find that the enjoyment of being up on the mountain is greater than the amount of discomfort I experience while there. Like, you just run these experiments and one thing leads to another. And so as long as you're willing to keep putting your toe in and testing that next thing, you'll find yourself 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road, doing some pretty amazing things that you wouldn't have believed in that domain that you think you want more of in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that so much. And I feel like this is a good place to take a pause and wrap things up. Jason, this conversation's been just really inspiring and amazing. And we're so grateful for the time you spent with us today. Can you tell listeners where they can go to learn more about you, where they can follow along with you, maybe cheer you on for your last 4 fastest known times of this upcoming goal of 100 and all that good stuff?
Absolutely. So I'm most active on Instagram, and it's just Jason Hardrath. I'm also on Facebook. I think I tend to be the only Jason Hardrath that pops up. Then LinkedIn, and I have a website, jasonhardrath.com, though I need to get better at actually writing, long length blog posts instead of just running off and doing the next adventure. So yeah, those would be the places. I do have a YouTube channel that I occasionally post some videos of my climbing, which again is Jason Hardrath. So I guess those would be the way. If you want to get a hold of me to learn something about FKTs or how to do them, or possible FKTs in your area, or you're interested in being guided up a mountain or in coaching, if you reach out through social media, either Facebook or Instagram, I tend to get back to those messages within like 24 or 48 hours.
Amazing. We'll make sure there's links to all of that in the show notes. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today, Jason. This has been really awesome.
Thanks, Jason.
It has been a pleasure for me as well.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wanderers Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast, and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.